former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
To believe or not to believe? That is the question. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Do you accept the results of the 2020 presidential election? If you do, you're in a very slim majority of Americans. And today we'll discuss how you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know this election just doesn't add up. But if Trump did lose fair and square, the campaign manager who was deep-sixed during the campaign has now given us a pretty good idea why, and we'll hear from him. Plus, LibertyNation.com's outspoken political columnist Joe Schaeffer joins us to discuss how Trump supporters should react to a tainted election in their eyes, and what should their agenda be in the weeks and months ahead. Plus, we'll examine the latest threats and promising developments regarding your individual liberty with LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza in Talkin' Liberty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. Everyone seems headed on the midnight train to Georgia, where not one but two Senate races will be decided on January 5th with great drama, because Republicans need to win at least one to block Democrats from effectively controlling the Senate for the next 2 years, a 50-50 tie with Kamala Harris in place to break ties, which together with their hold on the House of Representatives and soon likely the White House, would give Democrats broad power to effect serious progressive reform. So both sides are pouring everything into the peach state, where Joe Biden finished barely ahead of Donald Trump on election night. One of the consequences is that at least 4 leftist organizations have tried to induce illegal voting down there, as outlined by Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger.
We have opened an investigation into a group called America Votes, who is sending absentee ballot applications to people at addresses where they have not lived since 1994. Vote Forward, who attempted to register a dead Alabama voter, a woman, to vote here in Georgia. The New Georgia Project, who sent voter registration applications to New York City. And Operation New Voter Registration Georgia, who is telling college students in Georgia that they can change their residency to Georgia and then change it back after the election. Let me be very clear again. Voting in Georgia when you are not a resident of Georgia is a felony.
Not that will necessarily stop leftists from doing whatever is required to win those 2 races. Meanwhile, President Trump's legal team is rounding the final bend in their efforts to overturn the reported results as they continue to file one lawsuit after another across 6 battleground states. But they failed to persuade one judge after another that their claims are valid enough or would add or subtract enough votes to change any of the outcomes. As prominent constitutional attorney Jonathan Turley says, the courts are deciding that the cure for the problems is worse than the disease.
The problem is that there's this disconnect between the evidence and the relief being sought. You know, they've shown irregularities. They've shown unlawful orders. They've even shown thousands of votes that were not counted. But they haven't amounted to the type of numbers that would change the outcome in a given state. But more importantly, these judges have balked at the idea of essentially negating millions of votes as a form of relief. And in Pennsylvania, the court said, look, these voters do appear to have been denied their right to vote. I'd rather count their votes than to not count millions of others.
So the clock ticks down and President Trump will soon have to decide how to proceed, and no one, probably including him, is sure what he will do next, though he has now said he'll be visiting Georgia to weigh in on those pivotal Senate races. But of course, none of this has stopped Trump's opponent from continuing to build his cabinet. And in an interview on NBC, Joe Biden affirmed that we are headed back to the new old world order.
America's back. We're at the head of the table once again. I've spoken with over 20 world leaders, and they all are literally really pleased and somewhat excited. America's going to reassert its role in the world and be a coalition builder.
This lineup, those you've selected so far, a lot of familiar faces among them. What do you say to those who are wondering if you're trying to create a third Obama term?
This is not a third Obama term because we face a totally different world than we faced in the Obama-Biden administration. President Trump has changed the landscape. It's become America first, which meant America alone.
So Biden cuts a decent swath trying to look presidential, despite a walking boot for a broken foot he got while playing with his dog. But that was, unfortunately, not the only embarrassing moment for the gaffe-prone former vice president this week. He put that booted foot directly in his mouth with this beauty about one of the most famous books in the Bible.
If we do, and I'm sure we can proclaim the palmist, with the palmist who wrote these following words: "The Lord is my strength and my shield."
Palms, not Psalms, or maybe that's like a Delaware dialect or something. On the home front, Biden turned heads, to say the least, by naming political consultant and progressive activist Neera Tanden as director of the Office of Management and Budget, of all things. And she immediately used the story of her family growing up to make clear that a big, powerful government is her passion.
We relied on food stamps to eat. We relied on Section 8 housing vouchers to pay the rent. We relied on the social safety net to get back on our feet. I'm here today thanks to my mother's grit, but also thanks to a country that had faith in us, that invested in her humanity and in our dreams. I'm here today because of social programs.
So we're going to get an undiluted progressive operative managing the national budget if she ever gets confirmed, which may never happen. And GOP Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas says the naming of Tanden lays to rest any notion of Joe Biden actually trying to bring the country together.
Neera Tanden's nomination, like so many of the nominations that Joe Biden's already made, show that he is not committed to unifying the country. He's not committed to governing from the center, as he said so much. I mean, look, his DHS nominee, Alejandro Mayorkas, is an open borders advocate who was intervening on behalf of rich Democrats to sell citizenship to America. Now, Neera Tanden has said Congress should not pass another coronavirus relief package unless we're willing to give checks to illegal immigrants. If she were the head of the Office of Management and Budget, she'd probably cook up some nonsense numbers to suggest that an amnesty or sanctuary cities would somehow reduce the federal deficit. She is so far to the left that it gives the lie to Joe Biden's promises during the campaign trail to be governing from the center.
Not that we actually expected Biden to be a so-called moderate, because frankly, moderate Democrats are all but extinct. Stay there, because when we return from a brief break, we'll discuss how you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know this election just doesn't add up. But if Trump did lose fair and square, the campaign manager who was deep six during the campaign has now given us a pretty good idea why.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
To believe or not to believe, election 2020. Now, facts are famously stubborn things, but when you hear the term objective data, be careful how you process what comes next. Numbers and metrics can only be considered data or facts if they rest on a foundation of mathematical certainty. While we've seen and heard the stories of expelled election observers, hundreds of affidavits alleging ballot fraud, and grounded theories of voting system manipulation, the most plausible case to be made and widely accepted for its objectivity about the dubious outcome of the 2020 presidential election is based on objective, verifiable, publicly available data. The saga of Election Night 2020 will be told for many years to come, and atop the list of tales will be the tidal wave of black votes which hit in the middle of the night after voting had stopped and then restarted free of observers. These votes came in just 4 cities, the largest in each of the 4 most bitterly contested swing states: Detroit, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Atlanta. Biden's black vote spiked only in those locations, the ones necessary to secure victory, and nowhere else. They numbered in the hundreds of thousands, with more than 90% going to Biden. Now, moving from the realm of the implausible to the impossible, the most prime exhibits may be in Michigan, where no less than 8 cities showed the entirely impossible turnout of 100% or more, far more, in Democrat-dominated districts. In North Muskegon, Michigan, over 700% of registered voters cast ballots. In Zeeland Charter Township, Michigan, it was over 400%. Just as hard to process is the matter of turnout. In Wisconsin, turnout was a jaw-dropping 90%, over 90%. In Milwaukee, it was 84% compared to a city with very similar demographics, Cleveland, where 51% turned out. Biden's margin of victory in Montgomery County, a critical suburban area surrounding Philadelphia, is incredibly reported as double that of Barack Obama in 2008. At the height of his rock star status that year, Obama received 69 million votes across the land. He got 65 million in 2012, as did Hillary Clinton in 2016. But this year we're told that Joe Biden, for whom there was zero enthusiasm anywhere, received over 80 million votes. Donald Trump, for whom there was massive enthusiasm, received 11 million more votes than in 2016, increased his support among black voters by almost 50%, and bumped his share of the Hispanic vote up to 35%. Republicans down ballot won virtually every competitive race in the House, most in the Senate, and held every state house and won control of 3 more state houses. And yet Trump still apparently came up short. These are but the most glaring of the myriad statistical evidence of an outcome that should, by all reliable measures, have produced a different outcome at the top of the ticket. Debates over the legitimacy of the ultimate result will carry on for years to come, but only one thing is clear. The objective data that I just described to you will never change. Nor will the official result of this election, barring a sudden change of fortune for the Trump legal team. And with the election now almost 4 weeks into the rearview mirror, we're starting to experience the fallout, the coulda, woulda, shoulda. And you may recall the Trump campaign fired campaign manager Brad Parscale at the height of the pandemic and the urban violence in July, even though Parscale was, by all accounts, a major factor in leading Trump to victory in 2016. And Parscale broke his silence on Fox News this week, saying he had a clear idea of what to do.
My plan tried to make this a choice election, not a referendum. And I think that was one of the biggest disputes within the campaign. I tested 140 plus policies against Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. Trump bested him in 139 of them with American people. They knew the president's policies are what they wanted. The issue was how to keep this as a choice election. Joe Biden's America and going back, that he somehow could do this better, which I don't think he can, or Donald Trump, who had made America better and his policies, and make sure it didn't end up a referendum on him.
But a referendum is apparently what it became, much to the chagrin of the man who, along with Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, was the chief engineer of Trump's shock election 4 years ago.
The people running the day-to-day operation were Jared and I. And I think that it didn't make sense why you would pull that team away if you're getting close in 2020. But we understood where the weaknesses were, we need to pick up the votes. We understood what election day operations need to look like because of the legal fight. We planned that fight out 2 years in advance. I understood that this was going to happen. My team understood it was going to happen. We had a plan to increase the Latino and black vote, which we did. We had a plan to try to keep the suburban housewives. We had a lot of plans, and we knew exactly what the path was to victory. COVID threw a wrench in it, but we still had a plan even through that.
But under pressure because of Trump's sinking poll numbers during the summer of despair, Brad Parscale was denied the chance to repeat his success of 4 years earlier, and the reins were handed over to a new top brass.
They paused. They didn't know my plan. They didn't know to execute it or not, and they started to diverge away from it, and they started to test it. Should we use data like this? Should we buy TV like this? Should we run this? Should we do this? Should we even work with the RNC? Which I think were crucial mistakes.
Crucial enough, perhaps, to cost Trump the election. They say victory has many fathers, while defeat is an orphan. No one wants to take the blame. But rest assured, fingers of blame will be pointed in every different direction by the GOP in the weeks and months ahead, just as they were by Democrats after Hillary Clinton's legendary defeat in 2016. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss how the great mass of Trump voters who don't buy the election result are supposed to react and behave in the weeks and months ahead.
Ready, set, go!
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com, because we put the power of the press in your hands. With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news.
And remember, liberty.
Today.
All the time and everywhere.
Liberty Nation connected the dots between a Chinese research biolab and a wet market where COVID-19 was supposedly discovered 2 months before the MSM. We were first to alert you of a serious attack on gun rights in Virginia. LN honed in on the Biden-Burisma scandal months before it hit the papers. We brought you exclusive interviews from the border.
We're looking at people just rising up.
Liberty Nation was on the ground in London.
Trump rally in front of the American Embassy.
Bringing you on-the-scene reports about Brexit. LN reported that COVID-19 was more virulent but less deadly weeks before others. LibertyNation.com delivers tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles, and a new Roku channel. Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
With reliable polls revealing that upwards of 80% of Trump voters believe the presidential election was rigged, and the campaign rounding the final bend in a long court battle unless they score a string of victories before the Electoral College meets on December 14th, how are the people who voted for Trump and consider themselves patriots supposed to react and behave going forward? While the country locked down and boarded up to prepare for a Trump victory, which would certainly have reignited widespread urban violence of the kind we were forced to witness for months over the summer, there have been no reports of violence from Trump loyalists. But can they be expected to just sit still and accept the outcome? Joining us to consider this thorny question is our old friend and outspoken political columnist for LibertyNation.com, Joe Schaeffer. Welcome back, Joe.
No, thanks for having me, Tim.
Well, it's a pleasure as always. So, Trump loyalists have proven that, unlike the left, they won't resort to violence to express their outrage at what the great majority of them believe was an illegitimate outcome. But how should they react? How should they react? And what should it lead them to do going forward?
Well, obviously, violence is a no-go, and Trump supporters are smart enough to realize that. You're just giving ammunition to the enemy by doing that. But I will stress it is of vital importance that no matter how this plays out, worst case scenario, Biden gets in the White House, Trump supporters should not accept the results of this election. That is important. This would be an illegitimate election. There are too many questions. There are too many red flags that are being buried as quick as they can be buried. This calls into question all of our institutions if we allow this to go on. And it is just part one of a larger phase. I've written a series of articles this week about really the tyranny that is being imposed on this country. We've been told a series of lies since Jeffrey Epstein supposedly killed himself in August 2019. The American people have had one big lie shoved down their throats after another. We've had these harsh coronavirus lockdowns where when our elites go out and play. You can't go to an outdoor restaurant, they will vote. And then the next day, they'll go to an outdoor restaurant. Forced to wear masks, vaccines coming. They're already talking about employers can fire you if you don't get the vaccine. You can't get on an airplane if you don't get the vaccine. So the election is tied into this. Americans cannot accept a fraudulent election. So there needs to be opposition. There needs to be no passive acceptance. It needs to be organized. It can't be chaotic. It can't be obviously looting in the streets, which isn't going to happen. But there has to be a pushback to this. It cannot be accepted.
What do you see as the most important priorities for fixing the things that made this election so widely disputed that even 30% of Democrats don't believe the outcome?
There's one thing that should be the main focus, and that is mail-in balloting. That opened up the whole can of worms. The voting machines are an issue, but right now, those were the voting machines used. I don't think you're going to prove anything in the next month or so about the voting machines manipulating the vote. You can prove the mail-in balloting vote fraud. It is so easy. We talked about this right after the election. I want to see those votes, those ballot dumps that came in at 5 o'clock in the morning in those key battleground states. Identify those votes. I want to know who they are. They should be able to do this. Start matching signatures. Look to see if these are real people, real authentic votes. Were they harvested the way Democrats do it? And that can be done, and they can prove that right now. So to me, but going forward, we have got to get rid of mail-in balloting. It opens up the fraud so easily. Let's go back to day-in voting, sensible early voting, maybe a week, 10 days at the most. None of this 4 weeks before the election stuff. And let's have day-in. You're a citizen. There are obligations to you. Get out and go ahead to the polling place and cast your ballot.
Well, the attention of most of the political sphere, shall we say, these days, is on Georgia, where 2 Senate races will decide control of the upper chamber of the U.S. Congress. Do you have confidence that the 2 Georgia Senate races will be free and fair?
I have no confidence in the Republicans whatsoever. Once again, they're bashing it in their typical loser party way. They apparently can't wait to get back to losing to the Democrats like they did before Donald Trump came along in 2016. Brian Kemp seems to be the poster boy for the phony Republican. You remember his campaign ads with the pickup truck, and he was going to round up illegal aliens. Well, now he's showing his true colors. He's an establishment guy. What they don't understand is the Republican Party is the America First Party now. It is not their party, and people are loyal to the America First cause, not the Republican establishment.
Well, we now hear Joe Biden repeating his mantra about unifying the nation, Joe. It sounds nice, but is it even possible? After 4 years of unrelenting and scurrilous attacks on Trump by the political and media elites?
It's not possible when you're a fraudulent president. And I will never accept this man being president. He ran the worst campaign I have personally experienced in my lifetime. And my memory goes back to Reagan Carter in 1980. He was worse than Bob Dole, which to me was always the template to me, the old guy. It's like, it's my turn, let me run, and then he loses. That's what Joe Biden seemed to me. And we're supposed to believe he got 80 million votes, outperformed Barack Obama, with blacks outperformed Barack Obama. It's just not believable in any way. And we've seen very strong allegations that I believe easily can be proven of fraud. How is he going to unite the country when half the country believes he's illegitimate? And they're right to believe that. We're seeing him being very low key now because he knows, they just want to sneak him in there. They know that they don't want to poke the bear now. Americans are very suspicious, and they're counting on us just passively accepting this as a fait accompli. And as long as the American people don't do that, I think we'll be okay. Even if he got in there, the outrage would be so strong. He is not going to be allowed to do the things he wants to do.
Joe, you wrote an excellent piece on LibertyNation.com about globalism returning under Joe Biden after 4 years of an America First foreign policy under Trump. What do you see as the most immediate effects of going back to the same system we had for decades? And is the Trump brand of nationalism likely to resonate again in future campaigns?
Well, my big concern, and I think this is answering your question, it's the most important part to me, is the vast demoralization you're going to see across this country. You're going to see people realizing we don't have power to elect our own president. We don't have control over our government. They have control over our government. And 2016 was such a ray of hope. I would think it would even be a ray of hope if you were a Bernie Sanders supporter or a progressive outsider. A person outside their system came in and overthrew their little apple cart, their little cartel. And they responded in the only way they could respond. They had no popular support, so they had to pull off this swindle. It was a very elaborate and well thought out swindle. You had to have your coronavirus lockdowns, which got your mail-in balloting, which got your fraud, which got this phony president. So Americans are going to be demoralized, and how will they respond? Passive acceptance literally will lead us to tyranny. We'll be so submissive to tyranny if we passively accept this. So to me, globalism, military adventurism, it's all wrapped up in that. It's about us not calling the shots. It's the elites who have their own agenda calling the shots. And that would be disastrous to the American psyche.
Joe, many thanks for jumping on board again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Joe
Schaeffer, political columnist for LibertyNation.com. We'll take a quick break, then come back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it is time, some would say beyond time, to talk liberty. That's why we call this segment Talkin' Liberty. It's when we welcome back in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, but more than that, the man who we have dubbed our guardian of individual liberty, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. So the Supreme Court of the United States hears arguments on whether a unanimous jury ruling applies retroactively. What's this about?
Well, last year, it was a 6-3 case, I think, written by Justice Gorsuch called Ramos. And in that case, the court ruled that serious sentences especially require unanimous jury verdicts if it is a jury, which is to say that non-unanimous jury verdicts are impermissible for life sentences, for instance. This was a practice done in the Deep South in a way that they could have blacks on juries, basically, yet still convict them in a racist manner. And that's kind of a non-disputed genesis of the practice. Now, the question becomes, because of its racist genesis, does that mean that it's, a racist practice today or impermissible today? And it was ruled that it was impermissible. Then the question becomes, Tim, well, what about the people who are already serving time and have convictions due to non-unanimous verdicts? Are they entitled to have those cases thrown out or reheard. And that's what this case called Edwards v. Vinoy concerns. And it seems like by the questioning, the judges are inclined to rule that people who were convicted by non-unanimous juries will be able to have their cases retried and their sentences thrown out.
Let's move on to New York City and D.C., where city councils have passed bans on cashless businesses.
Yes, if you think that perhaps during the pandemic or as a result of it, you might want to have no cash handling because of the potential for contagions, well, you're not allowed to do that. This is one of these sort of white knight measures that people get to proclaim they're the sort of like the champions and heroes of the downtrodden who may not have access to cashless payments. But it basically becomes a sop to people who just want to go ahead and keep paying cash. In fact, I think both in D.C. and New York, various politicians talked about old people who have access to electronic means of payment, but they just prefer to use cash because it's their tried and true. The sad thing is, though, Tim, for the business owners who have to suffer the consequences of paying people to deal with that cash on site, managing the risk of theft and serious crimes that come along with the possession and transfer of that cash, and of course paying for somebody to deal with it. One of the critics, restaurant owner, said he pays a manager 20 hours a week to deal with their cash, from the counting to the management of it, and transporting it. And it's just another imposition, Tim, on a business climate that is hostile in both places, that are going to have to compete in both places to retain who they've got, much less attract new businesses to these cities.
Meanwhile, the prosecutors down in Palm Beach County, Florida, just aren't going to give up on Robert Kraft. A Florida masseuse has been ordered to pay $31,573. The precision of that is perplexing. After soliciting Mr. Kraft to commit prostitution.
Well, they did give up on Kraft because the courts have ordered them to, Tim, but they're now taking out their justice on the supposed victims of Mr. Kraft. You'll recall, Mr. Kraft was arrested and charged with being involved in a conspiracy to engage in prostitution for sex trafficked victims. That's why these prosecutors, get to stand on their high horse and talk about it. So what's happened is that the sheriff, that state attorney Dave Arenberg and the sheriff William Snyder, what they did, Tim, is they paid investigators to go and get sexual services done at these massage parlors and then videotape others, and was later determined to be an illegal warrant violating the Fourth Amendment rights of all involved, including, by the way, the victims of voyeurism by the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department, who watched females get undressed and be massaged while nude to investigate sex trafficking. And just, Tim, to wrap it up with a bow, what do? They hammer the poor, quote unquote, victims of this crime, right? Because she was involved in the videotaped sex for sale situation, and she's got to pay. Right, the victim of the crime has to pay over $30,000 to the Palm Beach County authorities. It's just, almost every time these things are meted out, Tim, it is the quote unquote victims who are really hit the worst. And if people want to go ahead and make lives better for sex trafficking victims, the thing they need to do is make commercial sex work legal so that they have the full panoply of rights that any other person has to assert their right to be free from abuse, whether it's from customers or law enforcement.
Now, one of the most explosive issues surrounding this election and many over the last many years is voter ID laws, and the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals has upheld the voter ID law in North Carolina.
I think this is a very interesting decision, Tim. It comes from a 3-judge panel. One of the judges was an Obama appointee, and the other 2 were Trump appointees. They held unanimously that the North Carolina ID statute is constitutional. And what they ruled was that the lower court judge, the district court judge, had essentially ruled that the racist past history of the North Carolina legislature and voting barriers that they erected doesn't mean that going forward they can't erect anything that might be conceived of as a voting barrier and just have it knocked down because of a history of racism that occurred in previous legislatures. So what the district court judge said, basically, well, because North Carolina previously tried all this other racist stuff, I'm not even going to look and see if this thing is racist. I'm basically just going to apply their past history to this current law. And that's what the appeals court said was not okay. You have to look at the law itself and whether it is racist or improperly motivated by racism. And this law was not.
Meanwhile, the airlines are having to make a lot of decisions, and with the vaccine coming up, there's talk that you'll be required to have the vaccine and be able to certify it when you get on a plane. But another part of the reform is new rules for service animals. And while you and I, Scott, may like the decision because we're hopeless dog lovers, what about people who have anything other than a dog that they want to travel with, because the airlines are saying dogs only as service animals?
Tim, my dreams of flying around the world with my army of alpaca service animals has been scuttled. Well, that's true. And I think I look at this as a pro-business decision. There were cases of small miniature horses and pigs and and birds and snakes and all manner of service animals. And I speak with great sympathy to the afflicted who require or think they need service animals to fly. But also, come on. I mean, the idea that airlines should have to just suffer through any person's, no matter how far out their service animal needs, is a bit ridiculous. So, and airlines are free, Tim, or should be free at least, to go ahead and allow different types of service species at their preference, but they shouldn't be mandated to, I think. And so I think it's probably a good win for liberty in that world.
It's okay, stewardess. That's my service snake.
Can't say stewardess, Tim. My God.
I know.
Write your letters to Tim Donner,
Yeah,
okay? It's
please.
flight attendant, I think, now.
Thank you, Scott.
That's probably somehow inappropriate, too. I just don't know why yet. You're welcome.
Well, most of what you say is inappropriate, but we try to just sort of glide over it or edit it out. Thank you, Scott.
Cheers. Thank you.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, with Mark Angelides. All available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.
Ready, set, go.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com, because we put the power of the press in your hands. With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news.
And remember, liberty.
Today.
All the time and everywhere.
Liberty Nation connected the dots between a Chinese research biolab and a wet market where COVID-19 was supposedly discovered 2 months before the MS outbreak. We were first to alert you of a serious attack on gun rights in Virginia. LN honed in on the Biden-Burisma scandal months before it hit the papers. We brought you exclusive interviews from the border.
We're looking at people just rising up.
Liberty Nation was on the ground in London,
Trump rally in front of the American embassy.
bringing you on-the-scene reports about Brexit. LN reported that COVID-19 was more virulent but less deadly weeks before others. LibertyNation.com delivers tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles and a new Roku channel. Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.